Hello, world. Welcome to the Psych Life Podcast. I know it's been a while since we've done a podcast, but we decided to invite an awesome guest today, Elena Petrovska, and she is no stranger to the Psych Life Podcast. We've interviewed her before on her poem book, On My Period Poems, in which, just to refresh your memory, she wrote it on during, I think, a 9-month time frame every time she was on her menstrual cycle. And with that being said, hello, Elena, how are you doing?
Hi, Juan. Thank you so much for having me on again. I'm very excited to be here today.
No problem, Elena. Thank you so much for taking time to be on. And, I thought you were the perfect person to invite on this podcast, especially since on March 8th is Women's Rights International Day. And I really, really admire females and women. And you are a strong woman in my eyes, especially since you're brave enough to talk about the menstruation cycle, something that's oftentimes is stigmatized in women. But today we're not going to focus so much on the menstruation cycle. We're going to focus on women's rights at large and what International Women's Day means to you and to so many lovely women out there. And so how does that sound to you?
Awesome. I am ready.
All right. Awesome, Elena. So I decided in honor, because this podcast, Elena, is going to drop on March 8th, I decided to start off with a little bit of a celebration and mention some societies where women are heavily respected and they're at the top of the totem pole, despite in some Western cultures, there's a patriarchal system, but a matriarchal system at large. And I just want to let people know that these societies exist around the world. And one of my favorite societies is Kashia, India, where women are the only ones to look after children. And actually the woman's surname is passed on to the male when they get married. And then there's a couple other ones like in Akin, Ghana, where the women are actually the ones at the top of the social hierarchy, and they get to make decisions on a grander scale than males do. And I'll name one more for the sake of it. And it's the oldest matriarchal society in China, because China, just like the US, is separated into territories. China is also somewhat separated into territories. And there's 40,000 people that live in Musao, China. And it's a lineage that is proclaimed by women. And so there are a lot of societies out there that do value women from the get-go. And the fact that they have to be fighting for women's rights is something that's probably foreign to them, because women's rights is instilled in their society. I just wanted to ask, have you ever heard of any of these matriarchal societies?
I've definitely heard of some. The ones that you mentioned, I think, are new. And, that's, I think that speaks to how little we know about these different societies. So, that's very interesting. I've definitely heard of, in the Jewish culture, like religion is decided based on, I guess, the mother. If the mother is Jewish, even if the father is not, then the children are Jewish. So I've heard of that in a sort of matriarchal way. And I believe it was also Trinidad has some parts of it in which they also have matriarchies.
And you know what? I'm going to mention one more, and this one actually caught my attention, Imuro, Kenya. And I remember in grad school, we actually talked about this region, and it's a land where actually men are not allowed. And it's because it's more considered almost as a recovery zone for women who have experienced domestic violence in Africa. And I found that super interesting and fascinating, because that Africa is a place where the governments in control, they oppress their citizens. And it's also a patriarchal society where there's a lot of war happening. And with combat, oftentimes, there comes this patriarchal system at large. And the women's oftentimes, they go under the radar. Domestic violence in those regions, it's a norm. And the fact that Kenya was able to separate a space for women who have experienced domestic violence, I found that super interesting, and I feel like this type of information should be shared more with the public. So I wanted to do that. That was like my little way of celebrating Women's Rights Days, International Women's Rights Day. So
that's amazing. Yeah, I didn't know about that one either. It's like a little space just like a women's club, a
Yeah,
place
pretty.
of reprieve.
So it wasn't, I'm not even 30 yet, but when I read
I'm with you. I'm on that same boat.
yeah. So, but when I look at history, so 30 years is a long time for an organism like myself, where my lifespan's only going to be around 72 years, more or less, according to science. But if we go back 250 years, it sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot in the relevance of the timeline of Earth as large, and us as human beings forming society and expanding. It was just 250 years ago, where in 1769, when they made the Declaration of Independence, women weren't allowed to own property. Women weren't even allowed to vote. And even though the Bill of Rights talks about individuals, they oftentimes reference men, a man. And there's been a lot of talk that, well, the Bill of Rights, the founding fathers, they really wanted to include everybody, but it was against the popular opinion, and it would create a lot of problems after the war with England. What do you think of when people say that, and the validity of that, in reference to women not being allowed to vote and women not being able to own property, to be honest?
Yeah, are you asking about in terms of the reference to the founding fathers?
Yeah. Because that was in the U.S. in 1769. That was more a reference of a domestic issue.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I'm sure that women played a role in some way. So it's interesting when we speak about the founding fathers and this paternal role in the creation of a country, as almost to be in line to the maternal role of the creation of a child. So I feel like that often gets played out. The sort of talk about womb envy, maybe it comes out in the form of, you need the founding fathers to create a country because women are creating like the children, life, or, something like that.
Yeah. So it's taken, right, ever since that time, about 200 years, or actually 250 years almost now at this point, of women constantly having, and here in the US specifically, right, constantly, and in Western society, battling for their rights. I'll give you an example. It wasn't until 1848 where the Declaration of Sentiments was signed. And I know I'm hitting you with a lot, but I did my research for you. And the Declaration of Sentiments was signed. That was basically a bunch of women, they got together in New York, and they were fighting for women's rights. And that's one of the ways it started here. And believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, but the US actually beat Europe to the punch, because in Europe, it actually wasn't until, I believe it was 1908 where the first International Women's Day was made. And actually, 1911 in Europe. And those countries were included: Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and Denmark. So even though these organizations and these fights though happened, and I want everybody to know this, even though these groups were being formed for women's rights, the action and the consequence that was transpiring from those moments wasn't necessarily the results those groups wanted. And what I'm trying to let everybody know is it took 250 years for women to have the opportunities that they do have today. I considered myself as a Hispanic male, Elena, and obviously coming in Miami, I didn't face as much discrimination because there's a huge Hispanic population. But no, it's not like when I look back at my ancestry, I can't pinpoint a time where my people were slaves or they were oppressed. Obviously, my parents, they came from an oppressed regime in Cuba, but that's another story. Women in general, as a group, females as a group, they've been oppressed throughout the centuries. And this may seem like a bad question, I guess, but I want to ask it. When I mention some of these facts, and you hear about these women groups that obviously you already know about coming together to try to fight for women's rights, how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts regarding that?
I mean, I think it's awesome. I think it's a great question, and something we need to reflect on more, like a coming together as a society now. what it means to be a woman is expanding, and we're still contemplating on that topic. There are, transgender women. There are women who maybe don't necessarily identify in all the ways that we've traditionally viewed it to mean to be a woman. So I think that word is constantly being redefined to match up with the times and to create more space for us all who identify as that. And you're right, you cut yourself sort of woman, female, right? Like it's confusing. And I think that we need to talk about our personal experience and our views and beliefs in what it means to be a woman, and then also what it means to fight for women's rights. Because it's not just those who are, cisgender women or cisgender females who are, assigned at birth as female that become women. Simone de Beauvoir, she has her famous statement, "One is not born but becomes a woman." And I think in the getting together and fighting for women's rights and the advocacy that comes with it, that is what will help us all as a society.
I'm glad that you mentioned that you caught me on that, and I have to go back to my fundamentals, because when I was in grad school, even the way they distinguish it, and literature specifically distinguishes it, is sex is female and male, and then woman and men, those are gender roles, gender identity, and specifics. But when, I guess the better term for me to use, so I don't sound like a fool out here.
No, you cut yourself.
But just for the audience out there, it's females and males, right? And it's females who have been oppressed, because even if someone was a female and they identified as a man, and look at the terms I'm using, because or boy or whatnot, they were going to be discriminated against because of their body part. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that you brought light to that, so I can shine it even brighter, and I appreciate that. Now, you mentioned, though, how women today in 2021, they're challenging gender roles, and they're challenging them in a big way. And I think that the fact that people at large in society has now adapted to the point where we allow for these things to flourish is a positive thing. And I'm just going to bring an example, because, I'm in Miami. There's a big trans scene here, and I've gone out a couple times, and some of the cool places to be, if you're a young person, maybe the trans scene, at nighttime with the music and the electronic music and stuff. And it took me, even me studying psychology, a while, not necessarily to feel comfortable, like if there's something wrong with me or the other population, but if it's something people are not accustomed to, it tends to bring fear in the beginning always. And then once we become accepting that there's differences out there and people have a different way of expressing themselves, then we become more accepting. And I think women today are very brave in challenging these gender roles. But, there's a lot of pushback, right, from the mainstream media saying that women, because they have babies, their roles in society are a little bit more fixed. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm just creating conversation based on what's out there. What are your thoughts on that? Because females, have to have babies, their roles are different than a male organism, where they don't have to cater towards that.
Right. No, great question. I mean, that sort of simplifies things, I think, and like having these fixed gender roles, in a way, it also may make us more comfortable, right? Like to play into these roles. It's sort of like someone, casts you for an acting role, and you're like, okay, got to cook, I got to clean, I got this. All right, this is what it means. It clarifies things for us. It could be comfortable in that sense. But at the same time, it sort of doesn't bring into light all these other folks who, like, let's say people who are born intersex, like, and then, the doctor sort of plays God and decides, well, what do I do with this genitalia? Which can create a lot of confusion for people, I think. And then also some females can't have children. And then the societal sort of push for them to have, to push children out could be really confusing for them as well. And there's always this tie, you're right, absolutely. There's always been this link to females and children, or females and, like, can they, can't they have kids? What does that mean? And I remember growing up and like confusing International Women's Day for like Mother's Day, because in Europe, I think the two are often convoluted or combined. And so I'm like, okay, so, as a 9-year-old, I was like, okay, so to be a woman means you need to have kids. And here I am, still don't have kids, but I would like to. So I think there's a lot of pressure being put on females, whether or not they can or can't have children. And as if this is like if this is like a box to check off of, our femininity or womanhood. And then of course, I am sure people, some females don't even want to have children. They would want other things. And then to assume desires upon women, I don't know how great that is for our society as well.
You raise a valid point, how that people conceptualize the role that a woman should play when we incorporate children, almost as if, and I caught myself doing that again, but I'm glad, that's why I brought you on, to be honest. And but I immediately, when I think of a female, right, I'm talking about sex now, and then a woman, because they chose that gender identity, then I automatically think of kids. It just comes. Mm-hmm. But you're right.
No,
it doesn't.
I do too. Absolutely. Right. Like, it's what we do. I think it's like bringing awareness to why we do what we do. That's important. And that's what you're trying to do here. Absolutely.
And I'm making the mistake though, that majority of, or the norm would be for, a female or a woman to have a kid, but not all are going to have it, and not all are going to identify with that type of role. And, this is new in today's age, and there's a lot of pushback in regards to the openness of it. I'm kind of somewhat, I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised, because I'm a very big on people having liberties. So I don't care what someone's wearing. I don't think there should be a law against that. I don't think there should be a law against speech. And I don't even think that it should be a question of what someone wants to identify with or not. And that's a valid point, and I appreciate you bringing awareness to that subject. Now, there's a lot of topics regarding women that there's still a lot of oppression that you guys face. And I hope you don't mind, Elena, but I wanted to read some facts that I found quite interesting getting ready for this. And these are more management position statistics in regards to male and females, okay? So women hold 7.4% of Fortune 500 CEO roles, 7.4%, which totals a tally of 33 women total. 29% of senior management officials is female, and this is in the corporate world, of course. 31% of senior roles are held by women in the US. Once again, outnumbered. 31% means to 69% male. 5% of American women are employed as chief financial officers in Fortune 500 companies, only 5%. And the last one here, female CEOs are more likely to be fired than male CEOs. Now, I've read, these are just statistics, these are just facts. The conclusions we form off these statistics, the extraneous variables we find about these statistics, those are relevant as well. And those are kind of the topics I want to discuss, because sometimes people grab those facts and they say, oh, this is, females are still oppressed in society. And sometimes people grab those facts and they'll say, no, but, and they try to justify these facts. When you see these facts, what do you see? What do you think? What do you visualize in your mind?
I think the gist of them, I believe in the gist of the statistics, whether or not, the numbers are what they are. People like to debate about the numbers, fine. But I think the gist of what you're saying is true, that there are just differences based on the bodies we have, that we live in, not just women, but because this is, this segment of your podcast is on that. I want to focus on that. I think the gist of that is very much true.
In regards to these statistics, though, I feel like they're really lopsided.
Right.
And then people want to say, because I've seen these arguments, and they say, well, because a female has to cater towards caregiving and responsibilities in the household, these are roles that have been developed through thousands of years. This is why they're not as well suited for these positions. So they're less inclined to go into these positions. Now, I'm very well versed in this because I've heard a lot of talk regarding this. I've read a lot of literature regarding this. And I want to see what your opinion is about that, because it's very tough to measure these variables in our field because they're so extraneous by nature, and they're so influential in the way they influence us, cloaks themselves. It's hard to measure. So what are your opinions regarding that point right there?
Yeah,
Some people say that. So.
Yeah, I think that, I definitely heard it myself as well. The pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, you see a lot of these gender roles play out, right? Like, we're forced to be at home. We're under like the confines of the four walls we live in, of our New York City apartments or Miami houses or homes, whatever. So you see the gender roles play out. The women are, and I'm not talking for every single family, but I think the New York Times had an article where, that's sort of like speaking to this point, that the gender roles are sort of being played out again. And women were more so let go of, because women were more in these, sort of like essential worker roles. Also, I think that it's brought to light all of these roles, and who does the cooking, who does the cleaning, who takes care of the kids, while both the mom and dad, or both parents are working also at home. So the New York Times also had this like hotline where parents can call in. It's called the Primal Scream hotline, and they just scream. And I've heard a lot of mothers just like, I've done my 6th load of laundry today. So I don't think there should be any, of course, discrimination in terms of like, well, a woman might get pregnant, so we really have to look for a man who can be stable in this role. At the same time, I think men need to go on paternity leave as well. I think it's important for children to spend time with both parents. And I think that's a systemic issue, that we need to look at how we're treating parents, and have more equality in that.
And I know that recently in Canada, and this isn't that recent anymore, it's probably 2-3 years. You know how information flies nowadays.
Right.
That's probably yesterday's news. But they tried an experiment with that, right? They tried the whole, we're going to give the father also paternity leave, and they had tremendous results. And I'm really bothered because I forgot how they measured these results. What were the consequences that they said it was positive? But it's funny how our minds work. We remember the positive effects it's had. They've actually stuck through it. And the US doesn't really honor that system. And I think that goes to show how we're still not understanding of the role and the power females and women both, they're correlated in the term gender, sex, but the power they have, because without females, and this is something we measured the first time we had you on the podcast when we discussed your On My Period poem book, that is such a necessary role of having children. It is in our society, but it doesn't mean it has to play out like that. It all depends on the individual. All right. I'm sorry. I really wanted to touch on that topic because, it's an important topic to me. It's lopsided. And I think it's too easy, even though we need more data, it's too easy to say that females aren't well suited for these positions. And that's why they don't tend to go into these positions as much. And they try to present statistics. Like, for example, recently I was telling you before we got on, I was reading, and sometimes if I think the study was done in Denmark, coincidentally enough, where they tried making students choose between a multitude of professions. And no matter how they tried and phrased it, males were less likely to go into the nursing profession. And people didn't understand why that was, despite them trying to cater towards it. But I don't think that's a good study to represent for these statistics, especially in management, almost as if saying women or females wouldn't be good managers or CEOs, when I think it's the complete contrary, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm trying to make this podcast interesting by asking some interesting questions, like what certain individuals would say. Now, hierarchies, right? They're in all animal species. There's a hierarchy within the species themselves, within the planetary system, within the universal system. There's hierarchies in place, even among us in societies. If we want to, depends on what type of magnifying lens we're using to zoom in and out. But let's look at societies as a whole. There's always hierarchies, even in different animal species. Now, when we talk about patriarchal systems, we're talking about the man is mostly in power. It revolves around the man. When we talk about matriarchal, which we celebrated earlier on the podcast, they're female-oriented societies where the females really have the, not the upper hand, but they have more weight in their decision-making. Sorry, I'm trying to find the right words to use. And the reason I'm going through all this is because in most hierarchies and social hierarchies, the males tend to have like this dominant role when you look at different animal species. But I always tell people that's not the case. You're looking at it through the wrong lens, because if you look at different components within that animal species, it's actually the females that are in charge. For example, in certain types of monkeys, the males aren't even allowed to interact with the kids till a certain age. Only the mother is allowed to do that. But yet some people will look at that and say, oh, that's a patriarchal system. When for me, I see it more as that's a little bit of both, because the woman is so important that she's the only one allowed to interact with those kids. What do you think about that? Because these are very complex, obviously, topics and whatnot.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of the movie. Have you seen it, Gone Girl, with Rosamund Pike?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's and she actually has a recent new one on Netflix too. What was it called? I Care a Lot. And so it speaks to, this sort of empowerment as well for women, and how the hierarchy plays out, maybe even in in smaller places, such as like a relationship between a man and a woman. So a heterosexual relationship for a Gone Girl. And then actually in I Care a Lot, it's a woman and woman relationship. So she's become sort of like a lesbian icon for that, I've heard. But I think that, this hierarchy, right? Like, you're right that are we viewing this hierarchy through the correct lens? Because power gets shifted and transferred all the time. Even, through this conversation, it's a back and forth. Like, sometimes you have it, sometimes I have it. And I think even in relationships and systems, whether it's like a family system or a workplace environment system, the power constantly gets shifted. It's how are we distributing that power, and what ways is it getting shifted in? I think that also needs to be asked and questioned. And since when has this been the hierarchy, right? Even with Kamala Harris, right? People were questioning that, what if she becomes president? What would it be like to have a woman president, a female president? So the power is always being shifted back and forth. And by the way, I would love to see that. I'd love to see her in office. I think she would be amazing for it. So yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. What lens are we viewing this hierarchy from?
Some would say, and I think this is not a so good argument, I'm just bringing up points people make and stuff. Yeah. That was 200 years ago. In 2021, every individual has the same opportunities, more so than ever, which is true, more so than ever, to be who they want to be. And people bring that up argument all the time, and it's a good one and it's something we as a society should be proud of. But why is that good enough and we can be better because oh yeah, this is the best society has ever been for us in, as far as comfort and opportunities for individuals as large, but there's still discrimination that exists, just like the facts that we brought up about women in managerial and CEO positions. I think it's a perfect representation of that. But some people will say, oh, victimhood is tied, victimhood, look at the words they use. This is all the time. Victimhood is tied to this feeling that people should feel oppressed, women or people in minority groups. They're tying victimhood to it. I don't agree with that because we never know what somebody went through, and I don't think victimhood tends to apply to that per se. What are your thoughts on this? Because that's been a topic where there's been a lot of fire surrounding it.
Right, like victimhood in terms of in like what context?
I'll give you an example. Yeah. Like someone will say, "Oh, these statistics that I read to you about CEO positions, that's victimhood. That's victimhood because they have opportunities. It's just their gender or their sex doesn't want to pursue it. It's not in the female's personality to want these positions. They'll make a claim like that based on these facts. You know, they'll grab that and they're facts, but they twisted it a different way. Does that anger you in any way as a female? Try to say they don't want those positions, and just disregard it as victimhood, and they disregard that's a victimhood mentality. Does that bother you in any way?
It is bothersome, definitely. I mean, I think there are, I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure there are women who don't want positions as CEO. Like I would never want that because it's in a corporate environment. That's a different story though. It's not because of the CEO role. It's just because I never want to work in corporate America. But I think that of course it's bothersome that people say that, and that there are certain differences between the sexes, that men are these like go-getters and women are sort of more passive or something like that, like Mad Men style, as if we're still in that age and time of women being secretaries and men owning the office kind of thing.
And I'm sorry to interrupt that. I'm honestly sometimes in shock on how people grab facts and they'll twist them to fit a certain narrative that they're trying to present to themselves, or they almost like try to keep making themselves believe like this ideology that females don't have managerial or CEO positions because they don't want them and they don't try to pursue those careers, when really there's no evidence to show that conclusion. And so we're just trying to almost, I guess we can say we're debunking arguments. Now, there is one topic I did want to get into, and I think we talked about this. I think in the last podcast, we touched on it, how red is a powerful color. And one of the reasons red is such a powerful color is because in our genetic component, red makes it almost like it ties us in our genetic communication that, if a female is turning a little bit red, she has her fertility going, right? Or these different components. And it also with guys. So like, that's why red is such a passionate, attractive color, because it's almost also in our DNA on the way our skin turns. Like, for example, when we blush and there's these little things tied. But there's been a lot of talk, and this is mostly coming from, I don't want to put Jordan Peterson in a negative light here, but in his camp or whatnot, he's come on and said that females, they wear makeup because they want to seem more attractive to males, to their opposite sex, or whatever the case is. Now, that immediately got a lot of pushback, right, from other psychologists and stuff. But he presented some data to say why. And then he said that the problem with discrimination in the workplace, and I know I'm going really deep here, but he said that the problem with discrimination in the workplace is that there isn't a set of guidelines for both sexes to follow, and it's somewhat new in our species development for males and females to work in the same place. And since that component is involved with the makeup, and then the males are getting the wrong signal, and there's no clear line of rules That's why sometimes sexual harassment and stuff takes place. Now, these are obviously, he's a psychologist, he's making his psychological analysis, let's say.
Mhm.
But personally, I see what he's saying. You know, it's just a fact about the red and stuff. But then when he says that there isn't clear-cut rules, I can understand what he means. What I don't like is that some people grab that information and they justify it as this is why this is happening, when it's so much more complex. So I just wanted to, and we're going to kind of finish off on this one, and because it's kind of like it's a touchy one, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts are regarding that in women in makeup, and then the not clear rules in the workplace.
Totally. Yes, I've definitely heard about this Jordan Peterson thing. Yeah, I and from what I've heard, makeup was sort of created to mimic the height of orgasm during sex. So that's why it's sort of like you have the blush that people put on, and that's to mimic the flush of the face during orgasm, or you have like smoky eyeshadow to mimic like the dark eyes, or lipstick also to mimic like after kissing the lips getting redder, etc. And you're right, red is a really, I mean, like Valentine's Day, and yeah, exactly as you said, you know, like blood, and it's the color of love. There have been psychological studies saying that people who wear red appear more attractive than any other color, like if they were to wear any other color. So I think it's a real question. I think it's a question a lot of women ask themselves. You know, how much should I put on? How much makeup? What should I wear? Like even before this podcast, I found myself asking those same questions every day though. It's like wherever I go, I'm like, okay, well, like how much is just the mid range, right? Like what is the middle Goldilocks point that I should be? And that's always, I think, a question of women. Am I too much or am I too little? I don't know if men ask themselves the same questions, but I think it's such a prevalent question for women. Am I, you know, are the heels too much? Is my outfit too little? What is, you know, these roles we have, like with these titles that we have, like what is casual? What is business casual? And so I think these are like really real questions that we ask ourselves each day, and it doesn't make it any easier, right? Like you can either fall into, oh, I'm attracting attention, or, you know, like videos on YouTube of like women walking around Manhattan and then they get catcalled, and oh, she was asking for it, right? Like I'm sure you've heard of that. So it's like, well, that points to a real thing of we all want to be noticed. Everyone wants to be noticed. We don't want to feel like we're not noticed in this world. But why must it be that women are noticed through sexual appearance? And I think that gets at all of this that you've discussed, everything that you've spoken about, that it's these expectations we have of different genders that put us in these very roles to begin with.
Yeah, you bring up some great points that honestly I didn't even think about, and it's a product of me not necessarily being a male, well, probably being a male my whole life and stuff. But what is too much makeup? Oh, is this? And I know you females, they tend to have to operate within a smaller boundary or smaller lane, let's put it, or pathway than males do. Oh, she's wearing these high heels, she's wearing makeup, she's wearing this. Oh, she deserved that because she's bringing it. And so you guys have to operate within a thinner line, also because of the way society exploits certain female body parts, and they make it and they make it this whole complex equation that it doesn't have to be. But what I'm hearing from you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I want to clarify this point. You agree that red and the females wearing makeup is a product of also trying to have show some sex appeal, but that's not the only reason, is what I'm saying. That's not the only reason, like Mr. Peterson kind of portrayed it. right? And I have a lot of respect for him, but we have to question some of these things if he's not a God. And then at the same time, he says there's no clear-cut rules in the workplace for when women do wear these things and they give false signals. I feel like that's a good point he made, but it's not the end-all be-all point, right? And I think that's, I don't mean to bring the children health book series, but I want to eventually.
No, bring it in. You should be very proud of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. But later on, as we get longer in the Psych Life book series, I'm going to see if we incorporate some of these stigmas females face. And I'm going to, you could take my word on that, probably in the later ones, like 6, 7 for 8th book. We're in the process of releasing the second one now. But I do want to do this because these are important topics and we need to destigmatize this topic. But with that being said, Elena, thank you so much for being on this podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to come here a second time. I can't stress that enough. And happy International Women's Day on March 8th,
Thank you.
2 days away, and happy Women International Day to everybody out there. If you want to share any words, you can right now to the audience.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Juan, and thank you for this great discussion. It's always fun talking to you, and you bring up so much that I feel we can't even cover in one podcast. So I feel like we've only touched the surface, but nonetheless, great idea for a topic. And thank you for inviting me again, and for starting, just getting the conversation started, getting people to think. And thank you everyone listening for listening.
And just one final point, if on the bottom of this caption, you can find Elena Petrovska's book, On My Period Poems, where she wrote during a 9-month time frame. And also, if you're interested in our Children's Mental Health book series, the Psych Life Children's Mental Health book series, that's also a link down there. And I will be posting right here the link to our previous interview with Elena. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Spotify, just check out our YouTube channel, all right? So thank you so much, Elena. I appreciate you, and we will be talking soon again, okay?
Awesome. Thank you, Juan.